For 6 Thanksgivings in a row, my family forgot about me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it wasn't. So instead of waiting to be remembered, I did something else. I built a life they couldn't walk into. But let me tell you how it all started.
For 6 Thanksgivings in a row, my children told me the same sentence. We're keeping it small this year. Small. It is astonishing how one polite word can quietly close a door. At first, I believed them. But 6 years later, I found myself asking a question I had been avoiding. Had my children slowly removed me from their lives without ever saying so? And if they had, what happens when the person they pushed aside stops waiting to be invited back? Because what I did next changed everything. My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 72 years old. For 32 years, I worked as a school principal, resolving conflicts between children who did not yet know how to express what they felt. Ironically, I never applied those same lessons at my own table, because for most of my life, our house was the center of everything. My late husband Daniel built our dining table himself when our son Michael was 12. Solid oak, long enough to seat 14 people when the leaves were extended. Every scratch had a story: a dropped gravy boat, a toddler's fork, a heated domino game that ended with someone storming outside. The kitchen always smelled like flour and cinnamon on holidays, children arguing, pies cooling on every counter, Daniel carving turkey with dramatic flair while everyone rolled their eyes. Our house was never fancy, but it was where everyone returned. Until Daniel died. And with him, something else disappeared too. I just didn't understand what yet. But that realization would come 6 Thanksgivings later. The first Thanksgiving after Daniel passed, my daughter Heather stopped by with a casserole. "It just feels too soon, Mom," she said softly. Michael hugged me longer than usual. "Next year we'll figure something out." That seemed reasonable. Grief doesn't sit comfortably beside celebration. So that year, I stayed home alone. Still, I set the table properly. Cloth napkin, water glass, silverware aligned. Dignity, I told myself, does not require witnesses. But the following year, something curious happened. Heather called again. "We're simplifying things this year." Small, simple, manageable. Later that night, I saw photos online. A long farmhouse table, candles, 12 place settings. And suddenly I understood something unsettling. Small apparently meant everyone except me. I tried not to overthink it. But by the third Thanksgiving, the pattern was undeniable. That evening, Michael called. "We're going to my in-laws' place," he explained. "It's complicated." Complicated. Another polite wall. By the fourth year, something more troubling happened. No one asked if I was available. No one said, "Mom, what works for you?" Plans simply appeared, complete, finished, and I was informed afterward. By the fifth Thanksgiving, I stopped asking entirely, because there is something quietly humiliating about requesting space at a table that clearly does not include your chair. Instead, they send photos. Matching sweaters, grandchildren by a lake, Michael carving turkey, and every year someone wrote the same message. "We missed you, Mom." I would stare at that sentence and think something uncomfortable. If you miss someone, why didn't you invite them? But the answer would come from the most unexpected person, and it would change everything. Exclusion rarely arrives with cruelty. It arrives wrapped in kindness. After Daniel died, my children treated me carefully. They asked if I was managing. They reached for my elbow when I stood. But underneath their concerns, something shifted. I stopped being central. For decades, holidays revolved around our home. But during the second year, I gently suggested hosting again. Heather paused. "It might be hard for the kids," she said. Hard. Children move schools, cities, and friendships every year. But apparently returning to their grandmother's house was difficult. After that, things kept slipping. I heard about Lily's school play after it happened. I saw photos of a cabin weekend I didn't know existed. Plans always seemed to come together, just not with me. And slowly I began asking myself something I didn't want to admit. Had I become optional? The answer arrived 6 years later, from my 9-year-old grandson. 6 years after Daniel died, my grandson Caleb called me on his tablet. His face filled the screen. "Grandma, guess what?" "What's the excitement?" I asked. "We're going to Uncle Michael's Cedar Ridge house." Cedar Ridge house? What's Cedar Ridge house, sweetheart? "The big one. Everyone's staying 4 nights for Thanksgiving." Everyone. Children reveal truths adults carefully manage. I smiled politely. "That sounds wonderful." And then he added something that stayed with me long after the call ended. "It's our new Thanksgiving place." Our new place. I sat quietly for a long time after that call ended, because the painful part wasn't the Cedar Ridge house. It was what it represented. A new center of gravity had been created, and I wasn't part of its orbit, which forced me to confront a question I had avoided for 6 years. If my family built a life without me, why was I still waiting for a seat at their table? That night, I made a decision, one that would surprise everyone, including myself. After that evening, I opened Daniel's safe. He had always believed in preparation. "Security is dignity," he used to say. Inside were investment portfolios carefully organized. I ran my fingers across the documents. The numbers were substantial, more than enough. For the first time in years, I understood something clearly. I was not dependent, not financially, not practically. The only thing I had been waiting for was permission. And suddenly a quiet thought appeared. What if I stopped waiting? That thought led me somewhere unexpected, a place that would change the next Thanksgiving forever. I found the property almost by accident. A restored carriage house in the Blue Ridge foothills, stone exterior, 10 acres, silence. When I drove up the gravel driveway, autumn leaves were falling like quiet confetti. Inside were exposed wooden beams and 3 fireplaces. The kitchen was large enough for people to move without colliding. French doors opened onto a wraparound porch overlooking woods. The silence inside the house felt different, not empty, intentional. No memories of exclusion lived in those walls, just possibility. Price, $980,000. Paid in full. The realtor blinked. "You're certain?" "Yes." I named the house Hearthstone. A hearth is where people gather. Stone means permanence. But there was one detail I kept to myself. I didn't give my children the address. Not out of anger, out of clarity. If they wanted to be part of my life, they could ask. But something unexpected happened before Thanksgiving arrived, and it came from someone I didn't expect. The conversation began in Michael's kitchen. Heather had come over to finalize Thanksgiving plans at the new Cedar Ridge house. Guest lists covered the island. Room assignments, catering notes. Michael's wife, Laura, leaned over the list, counting beds. Heather's husband, David, flipped through a notebook with grocery totals. "It just makes sense to host at Cedar Ridge," Michael said. Laura nodded. "The kids love it there." Heather agreed. "And everyone fits comfortably?" Their children drifted in and out of the kitchen. Michael and Laura's daughter, Avery, sat at the counter finishing homework while her younger brother, Caleb, played with toy cars nearby. Heather and the Davids' 2 boys argued quietly about who would bring the football. Avery had been listening the whole time. "Are we inviting the usual people?" she asked. "Just family," Michael replied. A pause. "Grandma too?" Heather didn't look up. "She's not coming this year." Laura shifted slightly but stayed quiet. Avery considered that. Then she asked a simple question. "Is it normal not to invite your parents to Thanksgiving?" The room went silent. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "It's complicated." Avery tilted her head. "I just mean, when I'm older, should I not invite you?" No one answered right away. Suddenly, the language they had used for years sounded different. Simpler, easier, complicated. And for the first time, they noticed something strange. Every chair had a name, except one. They had built a tradition that quietly required their mother's absence, and that realization fell heavier than they expected. 2 days later, Heather sent me a text. "Mom, we thought it might be easier if we came to you this year." Easier. I stared at the message. Easier for whom? Easier because they assumed my home was still available, because traditions could be reopened like storage boxes, but they didn't even know where I lived. That won't be possible, I replied. No explanation, no apology. Then Thanksgiving morning arrived, and suddenly, my phone started buzzing. Motion alerts, one after another. I opened the security camera feed. Michael's SUV pulled into my old driveway. Heather's minivan behind it. Michael's wife, Laura, stepped out carrying grocery bags. Heather's husband, David, lifted a cooler from the back of the van. Children poured out of both vehicles. Caleb and Avery raced toward the porch. Heather's boys carried decorations and footballs. Michael lifted a turkey roaster from the trunk. Heather carried pies. Laura had a box of candles. David hauled 2 folding chairs. They walked inside confidently, like people arriving at property they believed belonged to them. Because earlier that week they had contacted my real estate agent. They said they were helping their elderly mother handle paperwork. Routine clarification. The agent gave them the garage keypad, and now they were inside my house, setting the table, lighting the fireplace, not maliciously, not angrily, just automatically, as if access was inheritance. First I called my neighbor, Tom Alvarez, then my attorney, Linda Mercer. My voice remained calm. I need assistance with unauthorized entry. When I stepped into the dining room later that morning, the room fell silent. Heather stood holding plates. Michael leaned against a chair Daniel carved decades ago. The children sensed the tension immediately. "We thought you'd be happy," Michael said. "Happy?" I asked quietly. "You never come to us anymore," Heather said defensively. "We were trying to make things easier." "I was never invited," I replied. Silence filled the room. I placed printed security stills on the table. Linda spoke calmly. "This property belongs solely to Mrs. Ellison. Entry without consent constitutes trespassing." Heather's husband frowned. "Are you really making this formal?" I looked around the room, at my children, my grandchildren, at the table that used to hold our entire family. "No," I said gently. "I'm showing you I exist." Then I placed a document on the table. Visitation and respect agreement, visits by invitation only. No assumption of access. Holidays by mutual discussion. Property boundaries respected. I want a relationship based on respect, I said, not convenience. The room felt smaller somehow. My granddaughter Avery stepped forward. "They never ask what you want," she said softly. Then she picked up the pen and signed first. One by one, the others followed. Not defeated, just aware. Something had shifted. But the most surprising moment of that T14, Thanksgiving, my way. They packed the groceries and left. Only Avery stayed behind. That evening, it was just 4 of us. Me, Avery, Tom, Linda. We cooked a simple dinner. Turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans. Avery asked about my childhood. Not politely, curiously. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel peripheral. I felt central. The fire crackled inside Hearthstone, and I realized something. I hadn't built a fortress. I had built a boundary. The months afterward were cautious. Heather began calling before visiting. Michael apologized one afternoon. "I didn't realize we stopped seeing you as separate," he admitted. Separate, independent, whole. 4 months later, he sent a formal invitation to the lake house. Dates proposed, room reserved, no assumptions. I declined, not from bitterness, from fullness. I already had plans. Friends visiting, book club meeting, a life that now we rotate holidays, some here, some there. No one enters without asking, no one assumes. Hearthstone remains mine, not a fortress, a boundary. I didn't buy a house to punish my children. I bought it to remember something important. Love does not require shrinking. And sometimes, the only way to be included is to stop waiting to be invited.
If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this.